Welcome to Maine Public's All Books Considered Book Club. I'm Cindy Hahn, and we have a special treat tonight. Our guest is Phuc Tran, and we are talking about his fascinating book, Saigon, a misfits memoir of great books, punk rock, and the fight to fit in. And besides being an author, Phuc is a teacher, a classicist, a tattoo artist, which I'm sure we're going to talk about later. He was born in Saigon, Vietnam, and he grew up in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. He studied classical languages and literature at Bard College and got a master's at UMass Amherst. He has taught Latin, and he owns Tsunami Tattoo Studio in Portland. Lots of interesting things to talk about right there. Thank you for joining us, Phuc.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And a big thank you to our sponsor, Bull Moose. We're grateful to their support for the book club this year, as well as our bookstore partners for their support as well. They are Bull Moose, Book Stacks, Left Bank Books, None Such Books, and more, and Print, Sherman's, Maine Coast Bookshops, and DDG Booksellers. So thank you. Phuc, let's get right into it. Congratulations. Your book has been so well received. It's in paperback now. It's very exciting. And it's a memoir, which my first question is simply, how hard is it to write a memoir? It seems that it'd be very difficult to write about yourself and your memories and the people that are close to you and make it speak to others as well. So how did you decide to write a memoir?
Oh yeah, I mean, first, really, like, you just burn all of your bridges, and then pretty much you're free. You're in the clear to go. Just kidding. I didn't burn all my bridges, but it was a challenge. But I think there were so many intermediary steps between sort of thinking about sharing my story and then sharing my story. I say this. It's on the surface, it sounds tongue-in-cheek, but really, like, I did a lot of counseling work in my 30s, shout out to therapy and mental health. So I think that did a lot to help me process and understand and metabolize sort of my experiences. And then, that was in my 30s. And so by the time, like a decade and a half later, when it came around for me to write down my experiences and my story, I think it felt less, traumatic, I guess. And so it was a lot easier, and also at least like the sort of raw details of my relationship with my parents. I have a goodish relationship with my parents, but it wasn't, I wasn't concerned or worried about, offending anyone, and I really tried to just be as truthful as I could be, without pulling punches as well. So I don't know if that's helpful, but above all, no, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, did you consider writing a novel or anything like that, and then decided my own life is the most interesting novel I could write?
No, not really. I mean, honestly, after I did a TEDx talk in 2012, and then the reception to that was really the first sort of seed that was planted, in me about sharing my story, more widely. Prior to that 2012 TEDx talk, like, I had never really publicly talked about, my experience or like my refugee or immigrant experience. And I just thought it was like, the whole thing was just so weird, right? Like, it was like, oh, like, I'm just like a refugee kid that grew up in rural PA and like read the classics and listened to punk rock to survive. Like, doesn't everybody do that? I just thought it was just so like strange that nobody could relate to it. And so when I shared that story, and the feedback was so powerful that I started doing live storytelling first. So I did that around Portland and Southern Maine for a while, and then that sort of got me thinking about writing the memoir. So it was sort of baby steps. Like, it wasn't just like I woke up one day and was like, I'm going to write a memoir, as much as it seems like that on the surface. It was not. It was much more incremental, I think.
Can you take us through the process of how you go about writing a memoir? It just seems like not only the actual fact of remembering things from when you were so young, but take us behind the scenes to how you actually write, when, where, and how you write.
Yeah, the big process question. I mean, I think first, like, I think I made like a list of like, literally, like, I think my wife and I went out to a restaurant, had a few stiff drinks, and then I just had like sort of like a dump sheet, and I just wrote down like every memory that I could possibly remember, just as like bullet points. And then I listed them in chronological order, and then thought about which sort of thought about like the narrative arc of the story, right? Like which, which stories or which vignettes sort of like had some connective tissue that made sense and like, sort of segued into each other in interesting ways. And then as far as like my schedule goes, I mean, these are just like the blunt facts, but I was teaching during the day, I was tattooing at night and on the weekends. So I was working 6 days a week. So I was on this writing schedule I call like the boa constrictor writing schedule, where I was like, I would only write 2 days a month. Like I would write every other Sunday for a year. But on that Sunday, I would write for 8 to 10 hours, so it was sort of like, I think of it as like, this giant snake that like eats a gazelle and then doesn't eat for 2 weeks. It was sort of, my writing Sunday would come around. I was like, okay, I gotta write. And I would just write for, probably like half a chapter. And then, in the intervening 2 weeks, I would like take notes and, have, like lots of things that like I had running in the back of my mind, but really like I would only write 2 days a month, but it was all day. And I think it was just what I could manage in my own life, being, a parent and a spouse and working 2 jobs and all that stuff. Like I know that lots of writers feel like if you don't write every day, you're not really committed to the craft. And I aspire to that, but it's just like, but my life just doesn't allow that. So I think whatever, if anyone is an aspiring writer out there, I think like whatever you can manage to do to support your writing is fine. Like, I think that adage of like, if you don't write every day, you're not really a writer is like, I think it's not, I don't think that's true, at least not for me. I just wrote 2 days a month.
I think that is a big comfort hearing that from you, because you do hear that all the time. And most people don't have the ability to fit that into their lives. So that's interesting. Just in terms of the memories themselves, I'm still trying to figure out how, you're a little kid in big parts of this, much of the book. And do you just have a really great memory, or did you recreate things piece by piece? Like, how did you describe things so clearly from the perspective of you as a young man or young child?
Sure. No, I'm a total liar. No, I mean, I'm a terror. No, I mean, the truth is that all the events, like the actual, like factual, like this happened, those are all true. But as far as like the dialogue goes, I mean, I think that's like the piece of, what they call creative nonfiction. That's where the creative piece comes in. If you imagine the events as, sort of like the bricks of, your life story, like I think the mortar that holds it together is like the dialogue, the description, and that stuff. Like I think I just sort of, recreated or, sort of fabricated in a way that made the scene more lively, or like it imbued the scene with some emotional tone that maybe, like that would be helpful for the reader, or characterization. So I would definitely put my hand on a Bible and swear to all the events, in the book for sure. The dialogue, not so much. Like, I don't think that would withstand any sort of, legal scrutiny.
Right.
Yeah.
Your relationship with your father is really central to the book, and it's touching and it's painful, and there's the violence and the harsh parts, but you also write about times when he was trying to show you love and connection, and it's kind of like you're writing as yourself then, so you're not acknowledging that, but obviously in order to write about it, you are acknowledging that he had those moments. So looking back, when did you have the realization that that he was trying to show love to you in his own way and connect with you? Was it in writing the book, or just as an older teenager?
Yeah, I mean, I think all along, but I think it's so hard. Sometimes like I'm so glad that you mentioned that, Cindy, because I think like that's a subtlety that sometimes is not so apparent to readers, that complexity that I tried to, the complexity, my father's complexity that I was trying to portray and present. And I think I have that too. And, I think too often, like we fall into this, this trap of wanting to be clear cut, like I'm either the hero of my story or the villain or the victim. And sometimes it's messy. I mean, like our lives are messy and the truth is messy. And so I think I was aware of my dad's attempts to reach out and connect with me in tender and loving ways. But I was also a really angry teenager. And I felt like, if we didn't redress, sort of like past wrongs, how could we move forward? And so I think unhealthily so, like I think I held on to a lot of resentment for a long time. Fun fact that I didn't really, someday I'll write about this. In my early 20s, my dad actually sent me a very long apology letter. I know when I was like 23 or 24, and I remember getting it, reading it, and becoming so angry because I felt like it was just a day late and a dollar short. I was graduated from graduate school. I was like living on my own, and we hardly have a relationship. And I get this letter out of the blue, and it would just really, I think I still want to think about that and my own reaction to that, because I wasn't ready to get that apology, and I didn't know what to do with it. So I just didn't even acknowledge it for a long time. Yeah.
You mentioned therapy earlier. Was it therapeutic to write all of this for you, and especially in terms of that relationship?
What's therapeutic is therapy. Therapy is therapeutic. I think writing it wasn't actually. The truth of it is, I had sort of come to terms with and understood, and I think it's an overused word, but I had processed those experiences so much that in fact, in writing about the really hard stuff, like I had to sort of undo a little bit of the healing, a little bit of the healing in order to make the writing feel more urgent, or like some of the events, if that makes any sense. I had to sort of like pick at the scabs a little bit just to, get the writing a little bit juicier. So when I remember there were a few days like of those writing Sundays where, I was writing a really hard scene, or, just sort of periods of my life. Like I would come home at the end of the day and just be sort of emotionally drained because I had to sort of be a little bit regressive in tapping into that sort of teen angst, which, hopefully I don't carry around with me too much anymore.
That actually leads me to a question from one of our audience members. This is an email from Robin, and she says, I was deeply moved by your book and your story. Thanks for sharing it with us. You face such tough and painful challenges in your family life. What is one of the strengths that you've gained from those challenges? Is there a specific wound or wounds from your past that can still rear its ugly head to challenge you after all these years?
Oh, gosh.
Tough one.
Yeah. Thanks, Robin, for reading the book and for your kind words. I think, I think it's hard. It is still hard for me to receive compliments, and to feel confident in who I am sometimes and sort of my path in the world. I think like that's a lot of internalized, like a bunch of stuff, right? Like my home life, and then just sort of like my larger community, like a feeling of unworthiness, like general, I feel like I have a very healthy, maybe I have a healthy dose of, and then maybe like a little bit of a large second serving of low self-esteem that keeps me really motivated. Some people might think it's like a little bit too much, but I think for a long time, like anybody, I'm probably doing it now, just like sort of like the self-deprecating, like, shucks, no, my book, that thing's a stinker, and I think it's really, my therapist, we worked on it a lot, is just to accept, people's sort of gratitude and kindness with, grace. So I'm working on that. So anyway, I don't know. Let me know how I'm doing. Let me know in the chat how my grace is.
Yeah, on the side, I'll type you no, you're doing great. And actually, this is another related email. I think this is the stuff that really resonated with people in the book, but another email from Anne saying, thank you for sharing your powerful and moving story. How did you heal from the trauma you suffered in your childhood and teenage years? So you kind of answered that, but do you have more to add about the healing side?
Yeah, I mean, I think, yes, I don't know if I have a lot more. I mean, I think I'll say this, it's like an ongoing process, that I think that it's not just like, I went to therapy and now it's done. It's really like I think about it like going to the gym, right? That like like it's sort of perpetual upkeep in a positive and healthy way. So like I'm constantly checking in with myself, and I'm also growing, so that therapeutic process, I think, or self-inquiry and self-knowledge isn't just sort of like a one and done thing. That it's constantly evolving and changing as I grow and change as a person, and presented with new challenges and new things that are hard. So I think I hope that like we've come to a place in our culture where therapy and mental health and seeking, sort of counseling has been destigmatized in a way where, it hopefully someday, maybe it'll feel just as regular as going to the dentist or going to, your physician for an annual checkup, which I know, like, even in Maine, I think is like not everyone goes to see their primary care physician on an annual basis, or whatever, or, like men openly talking about colonoscopies, like this is like therapies like colonoscopy, but for your soul.
That should be on some kind of poster or something.
Yeah. Right. Are we going to get fined by the FCC now?
I think a lot of people have this question. Has your father read the book?
Yeah. So I have like it's a two-part conversation. It's very funny. When the book first came out, I didn't get like any text or call from him that was like congrats or good job, which is not my parents anyway. They're kind of low key like that. And then maybe like after 9 months, we were on a family text thread, and I just texted my dad and I was like, hey, I'm just curious if you read the book. Like, did you read it? You don't have to at all. And he texted back, he said, yes, I read it. It was very painful. And so that was sort of it. That's like the only conversation that we ever had about the book. And then I just saw my parents 2 weeks ago in California, and we were having lunch, and somebody, my dad was asked, what did you think of Fuchs' book? And my dad said, I didn't like it, but it's his right to tell his story the way he wants to tell it. And that was it. I thought that was huge. Like, I think it's incredible to me just to sort of witness his growth, and to recognize that like he can sit there with like a very, difficult recounting of his parenting, right, and my childhood, at the hands of his parenting, and to sort of be at peace with it. So I think he's grown in his own sort of strange way too, Yeah.
That's interesting. We'll talk a little bit about your brother, Lou, because he comes across as sort of this innocent and companion who goes through everything with you, but somehow he reacts differently to everything. So his role in your life, and also whether he's read the book and what he thought.
Yeah, I love my brother. I really do. I'm putting this out there on the internet so that it will live there forever. I think my brother is the greatest. I love him to pieces. And he was the one person that I was really worried about reading. I think of any of my readers, like his Venn circles and mine overlap the most. And, we shared the same home life, and, our experience of the town was, I think, more or less the same. So I thought if there was anyone who was going to call BS on my writing and the story and my recounting of what that was like, it would be my brother. And also he's a lawyer. So I thought like, okay, like worst case scenario, he's going to like just, sue me and be litigious. But he read an early copy, and then he texted me and he said, he just said this again recently. He said, you really nailed it. Like you nailed our home life and the dysfunction of our home life, and what it was like growing up as like the only refugee town in, small town America or small town PA. So I thought if my brother sort of gave me that stamp of approval, I thought, anybody else who sort of wants to take umbrage or, call, say that things weren't the way they were. I feel like as long as my brother sort of had my back, as he always has, I felt really good about the book.
Well, I know, like a lot of people reading your book, I was trying to picture your family members in my mind. And I understand you do have a slide with some photos that you could pop on the screen for us, as well as read us a passage from the book. Do you
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for letting me share some awkward family photos. I feel like,
I'm sure they're cute.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like in this age of Zoom where, you're reading on Zoom all the time, I have to look down at my book. I'm not tech savvy enough to read off the screen, so nobody really wants to stare at my forehead. So I'm just going to read the opening passage from chapter 5, which is entitled "Man and His Symbols." So I'll read that, and then I'll put up some sort of time appropriate. It's a family photo of me and my brother. So you all can look at that. August 1983. Where are you people from? My parents and I were pushing a shopping cart at Giant the grocery store. Lou and I took turns dangling from the cart, making impassioned pleas to our parents to buy Count Chocula. An older gentleman stepped into our path, intercepting us with his question, the question that, as I grew up in Carlisle, I would sustain regularly, a query angled with varying degrees of inflection, from curious to neutral to cutting. Where are you people from? Even at 9 years old, I heard the nuances of you people. I caught his drift. His drift was sharp and edgy. It was pointed. His drift didn't sound like a friendly game of catch. My parents hadn't heard him because they were Vietnamesing with each other about their shopping lists, and they weren't expecting anyone to speak to them. No one knew us in that informal, neighborly way, and my parents weren't part of the small town colloquium that burbled and babbled around us. I saw other people, friends and neighbors, stopping and talking to one another. How's Little League? Donna doing okay? Did you see the game last night? We weren't in Little League. No one asked about my mother's health. We didn't watch sports on TV. The man spoke up louder with the kind of volume that inferred lack of Englishing. Where are you people from? I nudged my father, who broke off from his conversation with my mother, to acknowledge the man. Yes, sir? Always publicly polite. Where are you people from? The man had yellow-tinted aviators and a graying mustache, reminding me of Magnum PI from TV. His belly overhung a large buckle pressing taut against his plaid shirt. Maybe he was a private eye. Maybe he was working a case or was grocery store security. Oh, we are from Vietnam. My father smiled widely, nervously. His default was always to smile in awkward or strange situations, but I felt his posture tense up. My father also caught the man's drift, and he moved protectively in between the man and us. Yeah, thought so. Thought I recognized it. Vietnamese. I haven't heard it since I was in country. Thought to myself, sounds like Vietnamese. My brother Lou started to correct the man's pronunciation of Vietnamese, but I kicked him from behind the cart. Lou caught my drift as well, and he shut up. In the Marines there, stationed in Da Nang, 68 to 69. He looked at us all as he spoke, eyes slinking from my father's rigid smile to my mother, to us kids. Oh yes, Da Nang. It's in the middle of Vietnam. We're from Saigon. My father continued to smile as we stood still, nervous prey whiffing a predatory scent. My eyes scanned the American flag pin and other buttons on his jacket lapel. The gentleman looked at us, but his eyes were distant, their focus going far beyond where we were, right through us. I looked behind myself at the produce section, understanding that he wasn't looking at the broccoli or cabbage. Beautiful country there, Nam. He said Nam with a southern lilt. Nam. Carlisle, surprising to most outsiders, has a slight southern drawl to its local dialect. Beautiful country, Nam. Goddamn shame what happened there. My father nodded. Goddamn shame, the man murmured. We all nodded and stood there for a time, staring at Mr. Magnum PI as he stared at the broccoli behind us. We as a family in turn looked blankly around. My parents gazed farther down the aisle, Lou and I fidgeting wordlessly at the cart, everyone bobbling their heads. The man hadn't asked us another question, so we had no answer to give. Well, you people have a good day. Thank you. You too, sir. My father and mother smiled and waved. Lou had used the distraction to sneak a box of Count Chocula into the cart. He nudged me. Why did that man ask us where we were from? My parents had already wandered farther down the aisle, sorting through the different cooking oils on the shelves. I was pushing the cart, so I answered my brother. Oh, because that man fought in the Vietnam War. The metal grocery cart resumed its screechy circuit in between the aisles. So? Well, we're from Vietnam. I said Vietnam the way the man had said it. Not me. I was born here in Carlisle, my brother said. Well, that is true, but people are always going to ask you where you're from. But I'm from Pennsylvania, spoken like the future lawyer he would be. It's true. You were born here, but it won't make sense to people. They'll still ask you where you're from. They mean mom and dad, and me, your family, where we're from. How did that man know that we weren't from here? It's complicated. I chose not to explain bigotry to my brother Lou, though he probably already knew it. He had experience being the only one in his classes too, but at least the other one at school was his brother. I was blindly hoping that he wasn't aware of the prejudice, but who was I kidding? Whose innocence was I trying to preserve? Why did he say that it was a shame what happened? Lou persisted. I don't know. He didn't really say, did he? I was pained to tell Lou to get used to being asked where he was from, but he had to. And eventually he would, whether I warned him or not. Get used to it or get crushed by it. We all learned quickly to smile and nod whenever veterans would see us and tell us that they were in Nam. They named their branch of service, told us what years they were there, where they were stationed, and how they found the people or the weather. Later, when I was older and just a little bit savvier, I would round out my exchange by saying something like, thanks for your service, or my grandparents worked for the US Embassy, volunteering something to identify myself as one of the good ones. But that was much later when I realized that this wasn't about me or my family. It was about them and what we symbolized for them. How could I explain to my brother that we were symbols, that some people would never be able to see us as just people, that we were symbols of a painful and confusing war, symbols of the refugees they saw on TV, symbols of what they were afraid of, symbols of the people who had shot at them and killed their friends, brothers, and sons, symbols of whatever they wanted to see. That was what we were for Mr. Magnum PI. In the middle of the giant grocery store, we had to pause our shopping and be symbols for what he saw in the fuzzy, distant gaze of recollection and trauma. The Tran family didn't choose to be symbolic or archetypal, but it wasn't our choice to make.
Thanks for reading that, Fook. That was very powerful and a big chunk of what I wanted to talk to you about today, because as an Asian American myself, I of course relate to so much that you've conveyed there. And what I wanted to ask you, because you do raise this and other incidents throughout the book that of racism that you experienced being Vietnamese America in the small town of Carlisle. So you actively sought out ways to combat the identity that caused you shame or embarrassment or discomfort. So you sought out punk, you sought out skateboarding to make up for that. And you write about that almost a little bit like you're watching yourself doing it and getting what you're trying to do as you do that. So now looking back on that, would you have done the same thing as your way of dealing with racism, dealing with stereotypes? Would you have sought out the same ways of like finding an identity?
Sure. That's so interesting. I mean, I think so much of what my behavior is dictated by sort of the general zeitgeist of the times. I think about my girls growing up now in the 21st century, and that just sort of the general American impulse is so different, right? Like I think in the 70s and the 80s, it was all about like the great American melting pot. I mean, good Lord, there was like a cartoon about it, right? And my parents really bought into that as well. I mean, and so they really pushed me and my brother to assimilate, as much as possible. We recognize now like that is like that the idea of assimilation is at the very least just problematic, and at the very most it's a blatant lie that it's effective or that it does anything good. And so I think growing up in the 70s, I didn't really know or have much of a choice or agency in what I thought I was supposed to do. My parents thought, oh, okay, like we're American citizens now. If we just speak English and play baseball and eat apple pie, like everybody will treat us like Americans, right? Not really. I mean, there's a lot of fine print there, right, in that contract, the social contract of being an American. So I think like growing up now, like it would be very different. Like there isn't that pressure to assimilate. There's like a lot of latitude for what it means to be American in all the best ways. So I definitely don't think that I would, maybe, would I still have been like, a ne'er-do-well punk rock kid? Maybe, I don't know, but I think I wouldn't have done it just to try to survive my town and to fit in with kids. Like I think that like my conversation with my kids, even now as, like they're 8 and 11, but, we talk about sort of like the structural things that are problematic in this country, and the structural things that hold people back. And, you know, I wish that I had known earlier that the problem wasn't me. You know, like when you know, that I mean, it's like internalized racism, right? It's like, how much can I change myself just to survive and make my life sort of as easy and smooth as possible, you know, when maybe the question could have been like, what can we do, you know, and what can we change about society and how people view each other and treat each other, you know, and to have the same opportunities. You know, obviously it's a much heavier lift, and, you know, as a 14 or 15-year-old teenage kid, like how do you even wrap your brain around that, you know? So I don't know if that answered your question.
I think we could do a whole nother hour on this Asian American identity question, but I'll skip ahead, actually, because what you just also talked about is the small town America, kind of painting a picture of that through that anecdote. And so I think in your book, what comes through is you have the mixed feelings towards Carlisle, Pennsylvania, just like you had the mixed feelings towards your father. And there's sort of this love-hate kind of feeling. You wanted to get out of the town, but that was so much part of who you were. So again, maybe if you can expand on that. And was that something you were just trying to paint a picture of, or does it still bother you that you came from there?
No, it doesn't, but it's just a complicated place, as living in America can be and is. I think for anybody, I think what's interesting for me is I don't feel like a strong, like I know my wife, who is sort of she is so deeply proud of being a Mainer and being from Maine, you know, and she's just got a love of her state and a love of her home that is really foreign to me. Like I envy it, actually, like that she loves where she lives and where she's from so deeply. And I just have complicated, and also I just kind of feel stateless, you know, like I don't know where. I feel like I fit in here in Maine. I've lived in Maine longer than I've lived anywhere else. You know, so like it or not, Maine, I'm here to stay. So, you know, I don't know if you'll adopt me, but I've adopted you. But yeah, so I think it's just interesting, you know, and in some ways, like, I think being an outsider means that I, in some ways, or feeling like an outsider, like I feel like my observations are really different and heightened in a way that maybe they wouldn't be if I were my kids now. Like, my kids grow up and they take so much for granted. Whereas like when I was growing up, I was like taking notes on everything. Like I felt like this like cultural anthropologist. I was like, okay, all right, like write this down, do that. And, you know, and like, this is how people do it. And it's not that. And so I was constantly taking notes and trying to figure out like what it meant to be American, right? And how could I be more American, as if there were like some kind of a spectrum, right? Of like, this is very American and this is not American. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a question from Jennifer. Have you ever gone back to your hometown, and what happened?
Yeah, there were pitchforks and torches and there were tomatoes. No, I'm kidding. No. So my parents moved away in the 90s. So I went back for high school graduation under great duress, courtesy of my wife's prodding and encouragement. And then I went back a few more times, just like maybe like one or two other times. Most recent, I went back for research. Like when I was writing the book, I actually, in 2018, I think, I went back and met up with a bunch of my old high school friends, and I met up with my English teachers, and just to take notes and corroborate, you know, stories and things like that. And then I'm actually going back in 2 weeks, so for some other stuff. But yeah. So I have been back, but I haven't been back since the book came out. So we'll see. I might just go incognito and then just sneak back out.
Well, that's what I wanted to know. How many people in Carlisle have read the book? Your teachers or friends?
Yeah. And I think, yes, all of the above. And I think they were really surprised by how hard it was for me, like living in Carlisle, because I think, at least for me, like outwardly facing, and I think this is true for a lot of teenagers, like I think, and I think now in the age of social media, it's even truer, that I think, like, at least for me, when I was in high school, I was really trying to project this, like, I've got it all figured out and like I'm super cool and whatever, you know, when like deep down inside, I was like, is this working? Does anybody know? Like, I'm told this is all improv, guys. I don't know what I'm doing. Just like, don't beat me up and give me a wedgie or whatever. Yeah. So I think my English teachers, and I mean, all my teachers, and then like a lot of my friends were like, they had no idea. And I mean, even just like the stuff, like with like the violence at home with my family, like they really didn't know. Like, except for my friends who put me up when I ran away from home. I guess if you haven't read the book, spoiler alert, I run away from home for a little while.
Read it. Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's a big part.
Yeah. So I think like different friends had different pieces of my life and could put things together. But I think like this was the first time that it was this sort of like, panoptic view of my experience. So yeah, it was surprising to people, I think.
I wanted to get to the idea that you wove the themes of your life into themes from great books. And that was such an effective technique that you used. So how did you come up with that idea? And what does the power of language mean to you that was so instrumental in your whole growing up?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it was, thanks. It was the first thing that I wrote for my agent. In 2016, I was approached by a literary agent who had seen the TEDx talk. And she was the one who actually asked me if I wanted to work on a memoir. And so I just sort of like word vomited this essay. I was like, okay, I guess if she wants me to write my life story, like here's just like a vignette. Bleh. And it was actually the prologue of the book, pretty much exactly as it is. And in the prologue, I sort of talk about my relationship with this other newly arrived Vietnamese kid. And I tell it through the lens of the picture, Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. And I sent it to her and she loved it. And her reaction was, I love how you sort of triangulated your story, or told it through the lens of this book. Could you do that for the rest of your memoir? And I was like, heck yeah. Like it's just like how my brain is broken. I don't know, like I may have had some brain damage or something, but like, I think like everything I think about, I'm always thinking like it's almost like this like reverb of like, and it's like this book, or, I also do it with like music and movies too. So it's like really, I probably could have done it for movies. I'm sure somebody is going to or will, sort of like tell their life story through like their favorite movies or through their favorite songs. And I think, and I just want to elevate, sort of like our interface with art. And it doesn't have to be sort of this like false dichotomy between like highbrow and lowbrow, like I think I just happen to pick literature because it is so close to my heart and is so deeply baked into my DNA, but it could be pop songs, it could be paintings, it could be, I think our interface with art is so spiritual and important to who we are as people, and it keeps us going. So I think, I want to sort of just say that, or give your audience permission to really celebrate whatever it is that they love. Like when people use the term guilty pleasures for reading, like I'm not sure what that means. Like I think like just read what you love to read and don't feel bad about it as if like you're always supposed to be reading like Melville and Tolstoy, like it's okay to read like whatever your guilty pleasure is and don't even worry about that phrase. Anywho, like I think, and as far as like discovering literature early on, like, I mean, again, like really like sort of it's tongue in cheek, but not really is, I didn't know what therapy was, in the 80s as like a 14-year-old, but I sure as heck knew what it was to read a book and to feel deeply seen and understood. And that was like the first place that was that I experienced that. Like it wasn't at home, that's for sure. And so like I remember the first time like reading like The Scarlet Letter, and I was just like, oh, Hester Prynne, you really get me. You really do. Like, yeah. So it really like saved me in a big way. Like that sort of emotional connection or just feeling like you weren't the only weirdo in the universe. Yeah.
That really comes through in the book. That's really one of the effective choices you made. A whole bunch of questions coming in, Phuc. So here we go. From Marianne, how have your life experiences influenced your teaching?
I love that. I think I really try to take teenagers seriously. Like, I think that was like the greatest thing that like my teachers did for me. And, I think about, and I'll try to sort of say this in as sort of succinct a way as possible. I think about like culturally how we talk about teenagers and how we treat them, it's not great. Like when you see like a horde of teenagers in the mall, or if they come and sit down in a restaurant next to you, or like, when you hear like, oh, well, Cindy just turned 16, she's going to get her driver's license. Look out, everybody. It's not really great. Like, we don't do a good job of treating teenagers with respect. In fact, I would say culturally, we treat teenagers terribly, and we talk about them to their faces terribly. And if you were to substitute like teenagers, like the word teenagers, for pretty much any other marginalized group, like, well, look at these Vietnamese people, they got their driver's license, look out, or like, it would just be terrible. And I like, I was acutely aware of that, and I am as a teacher, and I think we don't do a great job of treating teenagers. Like, we don't do a great job of shepherding them from those teenage years into adulthood. Like, it's really just kind of this pig pile culturally and emotionally, where we like kind of beat up on them, and they're the butt of every joke, and like they're sort of incompetent, and they don't know what they're doing. And then all of a sudden they magically turn 18, and then we're like, okay, here are the keys, and here's the right to vote, here's some guns, here's cigarettes, good luck. I don't, you're an adult now. So that's my long way of saying that, like, as a teacher, I really try to take my students seriously. And if they're really upset that they have like the wrong pair of jeans on, like, I'm just going to sit there and listen to them and not roll my eyes, and just, sit there in their emotional truth, I guess.
Good teacher and good dad, I bet there. Here's a question from Chandra. What were your favorite punk bands?
Oh gosh, yeah. And so, yeah, when I was younger, for sure, it was like, I really loved like that 70s, like first wave Brit punk stuff. So like the Clash, the Sex Pistols, the Damned. And then like a little bit later in the like late 80s, like I discovered a lot of the California stuff. So like Agent Orange and, Social Distortion. And then also, Minor Threat and the Misfits, and yeah, I could go on, but yeah, those like 6 bands there. Yeah.
I knew this question was coming. Email from Gina. Would love to hear how he ended up becoming a tattoo artist in Maine.
Yeah, so I was a tattooer in New York City as well. I was in my last year of graduate school, and had been getting tattooed pretty heavily for the last, from, my like undergrad into graduate school. And it was probably like a month or two before, I was finishing my master's, and the tattooer who was working on me just said to me, hey, like you're really into the lifestyle. I mean, you're getting covered in tattoos, like you should apply to be an apprentice. And I was like, oh, okay. It hadn't ever even crossed my mind that you could do it as a job and you like get paid to do it. It just seemed like sort of this like weird magical thing. So I had like a month left for my master's degree, and I applied for a tattoo apprenticeship in New York City. I got it. They called me up, it was like, but this is like before internet. So like I put a bunch of drawings in an envelope and like mailed it off to like New York City. And like, they called me on my phone, and they were just like, yeah, it was like so bizarre. And they were like, yeah, move to New York City in 2 weeks. We'll start teaching you how to tattoo. So I moved to New York, and it was unpaid. So I taught during the day, and then I tattooed at night. And nobody told me to stop doing that. So I did that for 23 years.
You were an artist. I understand that didn't make it so much into the book, that you've been an artist all along though, right? That's a big part of you too.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think like that was like a huge piece of my identity also in high school was being an artist. I took every art class that my high school offered, and by my senior year, they had run out of art classes for me to take. So I actually just had an independent study my entire senior year, where I just like went into this like closet and then just like painted, and my art teacher would just be like, that looks great, A+, I don't know. Yeah, we had to cut it. I mean, we had to just sort of cut that facet out of the book, because it just was like too many plates spinning. But yeah, so I was artistic, and I actually went off to college to be an art major, and then ended up getting tricked by the classics department. So yeah.
They lured you in. Well, here's a question from Sheila. Will there be a book about your college years?
I don't know. Never say never. Right now, I've got other projects that I'm happy to talk about. It's not like I have essays that I think are bubbling inside me somewhere, but like as far as like a full-blown book, I don't think so. I mean, at least right now, I don't feel the same narrative tension that I felt or feel about sort of my coming of age time in Carlisle. So, to be determined, but I've got so many other projects that I'm working on. So it's not immediately. Yeah, sure.
You want to talk a little bit about those projects, and then we won't pepper you too much more.
No, it's okay. Yeah. So I've got a children's book series coming out, the first of which won't be out until 2024. And this sort of speaks to sort of the glacial pace of publishing sometimes. So I actually turned in this children's book in the last fall of 2021. But my illustrator schedule is such that the first opening for the book to be released will not be until 2024. And then I have 2 subsequent follow-ups to that will come out successively in 2025 and 2026. And then I'm taking notes on a novel right now that I'm really excited about writing. So I'm taking notes and doing a little bit of research, and then I think I'm going to try and write a good chunk of it this summer, and then see what happens with that. So, yeah.
Are you using the same technique you described? Will you just squeeze in spurts of writing, or are you that's a lot of stuff to fit into one day there?
I think so. I mean, we'll see. I'll, to be determined. I think, now that I'm not teaching, I took off in 2019. I sort of went on hiatus from teaching for a little bit so that I could have a little bit more time to write. So hopefully I will write a little bit more frequently than twice a month. I would certainly like to.
Well, can't wait to see what else you come out with. And the children's book sounds fun too. So
thanks.
Thank you so much. Phuc Tran, his book is Saigon, a Misfits memoir of great books, punk rock, and the fight to fit in. Thank you. It was so good to read the book and to have you share all this great information about you today. So thank you. And thank you to all the audience members, the listeners who are out there, for joining us for this book club. Quick note about our next book club event. Join us next time for a conversation between host Jennifer Rooks and author Jeffrey Lewis about his book, The Land of Cockaigne, and that will be in July. So thank you for joining us. Bye now.
Thanks.